journey through Vermont's hidden crisis, the story of homelessness. Vermont's rolling green hills, fiery autumn foliage, and storybook towns draw visitors from around the world. To many, it feels like a postcard come to life. But behind the charm lies a quieter, harsher reality, a growing crisis of homelessness. In this travel documentary we peel back the surface to reveal a side of Vermont rarely seen. Families bracing against brutal winters, individuals battling addiction, and communities stretched thin by gaps in social services. Why does a state so small, so picturesque, face such a daunting challenge? From systemic inequities to the daily fight for survival, this is not just a story of struggle, but of resilience and hope. Join us as we uncover Vermont's hidden crisis. But first, let's ask, what forces are driving homelessness in such an unlikely place? Vermont's charm lies in its quiet beauty, cozy villages, maple syrup farms, snow-draped mountains. But beyond the postcard image, another Vermont exists. In Burlington, the state's largest city, tents cluster near underpasses, shelters strain past capacity, and families line up for meals at church basements. Even in rural counties, far from city lights, cars double as bedrooms, and barns become makeshift refuge. HUD's 2024 data tells the story in numbers. 3,458 people without stable housing in a state of just 650,000. That's a crisis, hidden in plain sight. Some are unsheltered, living on the streets or in encampments. Others survive in cars or temporary shelters. Many more slip into hidden homelessness, couch surfing, doubling up with friends, or moving from one unstable arrangement to the next. The climb in recent years is undeniable, and it raises a troubling question. How does homelessness persist at such a high rate in a place celebrated for its strong community spirit? That paradox drives this travel documentary, urging us to look past the idyllic surface and uncover the forces pulling Vermonters into instability. To understand this crisis, we must first explore its root causes. The story of homelessness in Vermont is complex, woven from threads of economic hardship, social inequities, and personal struggles. At the forefront stands addiction, especially opioids. Since 2014, opioid-related deaths in Vermont have quadrupled, and roughly 30% of the state's homeless population struggles with substance use. Take John, a 5-year-old former construction worker from Burlington. Once a family man with steady employment, his life unraveled after a workplace injury led to an opioid prescription. Addiction followed, and with it went his job, savings, and eventually his home. Today, John lives in a tent near downtown, relying on groups like Spectrum Youth and Family Services for meals and temporary shelter. His story, captured in our travel documentary, echoes across Vermont, where affordable rehab options are scarce and recovery often feels out of reach. Beyond addiction, housing costs are a powerful driver. From 2021 to 2024, rents in Vermont jumped by 20%, far outpacing wage growth. The expansion of Airbnb and high-end second homes has tightened supply, pushing locals to the margins. Inflation and job instability compound the pressure, while untreated mental health conditions, often intertwined with substance use, leave many without a path back to stability. Discrimination deepens these vulnerabilities. LGBTQ+ youth and people of color face higher barriers to housing and employment, increasing their risk of homelessness. Seniors on fixed incomes, a growing share of Vermont's population, are squeezed hardest by rising rents and medical expenses. Meanwhile, the state's shrinking workforce and internal migration further strain limited housing stock. These forces don't exist in isolation, they collide, creating a perfect storm that pulls individuals and families into crisis. And in Vermont, harsh winters and systemic inequities magnify the danger, raising a critical question: how do people survive when the cold itself can be deadly? Vermont's winters are legendary, majestic in beauty, but brutal in reality. With temperatures plunging to negative 20 degrees Celsius, survival outdoors becomes a daily gamble. Unlike warmer climates, where sleeping rough might be survivable, here it can be deadly. Frostbite, hypothermia, and respiratory illness stalk those in tents or doorways. Burlington's shelters often fill to capacity, leaving dozens to brave nights where the cold itself is the greatest threat. In a state that ranks 4th nationally in homelessness per capita, 53 per 10,000 residents, the contradiction is hard to ignore. Why does a place with such unforgiving winters have such a high homelessness rate? And what does this mean for those forced to endure it? Racial disparities reveal another layer of injustice. Vermont is 94% white, yet African Americans and indigenous Abenaki are 4-6 times more likely to experience homelessness than white residents. These inequities stem from generations of systemic barriers, discrimination in housing markets, limited job access, and a lack of cultural representation in services. In a state that prides itself on fairness, these numbers cut deep, showing how invisible biases ripple through even small, close-knit community. The state's social safety net, while broad in scope, often frays under pressure. Programs like 3 Squares VT, food assistance, Medicaid, and housing subsidies exist on paper, but funding gaps stretch resources thin. Wait lists for housing vouchers can run months. For those battling addiction or mental illness, bureaucratic paperwork can feel impossible to navigate. And in rural towns, access itself is the barrier. A single mother in a remote valley may have no transportation to reach a social services office, leaving her family at risk. These intertwined challenges, harsh winters, racial inequities, and fragile safety nets define the landscape of homelessness in Vermont. But who are the people most affected by these forces? In our next chapter, we'll meet the faces behind the numbers, families, veterans, and youth, whose stories remind us that this crisis is deeply human. Vermont's safety net is a paradox, a lifeline for many, yet a maze of barriers for those who need it most. Programs like 3 Squares VT help keep families fed. Medicaid ensures access to health care, and housing subsidies aim to protect renters from eviction. On paper, these supports reflect Vermont's values of fairness and care, but in practice, they are often underfunded, overstretched, and difficult to access. Consider housing assistance. Wait lists for vouchers stretch for months, sometimes years, leaving families like single parents with young children to fend for themselves in shelters, cars, or motels. In Vermont's rural towns, access is even more limited. Picture a veteran living in a remote village, seeking counseling for PTSD. With no service center nearby and no public transit, support is out of reach. For those battling addiction, like John from Burlington, navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth of forms and eligibility checks becomes nearly impossible without the stability of housing or mental clarity. A 2023 report underscored this rural divide. 60% of homeless individuals in non-urban areas struggle to access basic services. Even when they do qualify, much of the assistance is temporary emergency rental aid, may prevent eviction for a month, but it does little to address the root crisis of Vermont's shrinking affordable housing stock. The problem isn't just funding, it's also design. Services for housing, healthcare, and addiction recovery often operate in silos, leaving gaps that people inevitably fall through. A mother might receive food stamps, but not childcare support. A veteran may secure healthcare, but not stable housing. The system fragments lives rather than rebuilding them. This raises a painful question. Why isn't a state that prides itself on community and resilience better equipped to prevent homelessness? The answer lies in a mix of limited resources, rural geography, and structural flaws that keep solutions one step behind the problem. And while the system struggles, it is the most vulnerable who bear the brunt. Homelessness in Vermont doesn't look the same for everyone. It affects some groups far more than others. Youth, especially LGBTQ+ teens, face some of the highest risks. Spectrum Youth and Family Services reports that nearly 1 in 4 of the youth they serve identify as transgender. Many forced from their homes by rejection. For them, every night becomes a struggle for safety. Veterans are another visible group. Many return home with PTSD or chronic health issues and too little reintegration support. Their service is remembered in parades, but not always in stable housing. Seniors are increasingly vulnerable as Vermont's aging population grows. Living on fixed incomes that barely cover rent, one unexpected bill can mean the difference between stability and the street. Families, especially single-parent households, walk a razor's edge. Low wages and high rents leave them one crisis away from losing shelter, with children paying the steepest price through disrupted schooling and insecurity. Addiction and mental health issues weigh heavily too. Roughly 30% of Vermont's homeless population struggles with substance use, much of it tied to the opioid crisis. Racial inequities deepen the divide. Though Vermont is 94% white, African Americans and indigenous Abenaki are 4 to 6 times more likely to be homeless, reflecting systemic barriers in housing and jobs. These groups, youth, veterans, seniors, families, and marginalized communities, are the human face of Vermont's crisis. Their struggles reveal the deep intersections of economics, identity, health, and inequity, showing homelessness is never just about losing a roof. The ripple effects of homelessness in Vermont extend far beyond the individuals enduring it. They reshape the health, economy, and identity of entire communities. For those without stable housing, the toll is immediate and unforgiving. Physical health deteriorates under constant exposure to Vermont's harsh winters, where frostbite and hypothermia are not distant threats but daily realities. Respiratory illnesses spike in makeshift shelters, and untreated wounds often turn into chronic conditions. Mental health struggles, often intertwined with addiction, intensify without consistent care. Individuals like John, once a construction worker, now battling both opioid dependency and the emotional weight of instability, embody the compounding cycle of illness and despair. Children face especially devastating consequences. Vermont's 2024 point in time, PIT count, identified 737 children living without stable housing. For them, homelessness means disrupted education, frequent moves, and trauma that can echo for a lifetime. The Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness links this instability to higher risks of victimization, developmental delays, and even premature death. The burden is felt by communities as well. Shelters in Burlington and beyond are stretched beyond capacity, forcing cities to invest millions in emergency services. In the winter of 2024, Burlington's extreme cold weather shelter hosted 50 to 80 people every night, evidence of growing need even in the state's largest city. The economic impact ripples further. Visible encampments challenge Vermont's carefully cultivated image as a postcard-perfect destination, raising concerns among tourists and local businesses alike. Healthcare, schools, and public services all absorb the hidden costs. An emergency room visit tied to homelessness averages $1,386 compared to just $80 per day for a motel voucher. The math is stark. Preventing homelessness costs less than managing its consequences. Yet prevention requires foresight, investment, and political will. This raises the pivotal question for Vermont. How is the state tackling this crisis, and what solutions are actually making a difference? That's where we turn next. Vermont is tackling homelessness with a mix of emergency relief and long-term planning. Shelters like Spectrum Youth and Family Services in Burlington provide beds, meals, and counseling daily. While the state has one of the nation's highest sheltering rates, 95% of its homeless population was sheltered in 2024, second only to New York. Programs such as the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, ERAP, help prevent evictions, though limited funding leaves many families waiting. Addiction recovery services through the Howard Center have expanded, but demand still far exceeds capacity. Federal backing has also been key. Senator Bernie Sanders has secured millions for affordable housing and treatment programs, pushing for systemic reform rather than temporary fixes. Community groups add strength. Outright Vermont offers safe spaces for LGBTQ+ youth, while Good Samaritan Haven, named one of Vermont's 2024 housing heroes, provides emergency beds and case management in central Vermont. Looking ahead, the 2024 Housing Needs Assessment called for 36,000 new homes by 2029, highlighting the scale of investment needed. Yet challenges persist. Rural areas lack shelters and clinics, and coordination between housing, healthcare, and addiction services remains patchy. Vermont shows progress, but its experience raises a larger question. How do these efforts compare to other states, and what lessons can be learned nationwide? Vermont's homelessness crisis, while severe, isn't an isolated phenomenon. It reflects a broader national emergency. In 2024, the U.S. recorded 771,480 people experiencing homelessness, an 18% rise from the previous year. Rising rents, inflation, and systemic inequities drove the increase. On a per capita basis, Vermont ranks 4th in the nation, with 53 homeless individuals per 10,000 residents. Only Hawaii and New York, both at 81 per 10,000, and Oregon report higher rates. Yet Vermont's drivers differ. Hawaii's crisis was intensified by devastating wildfires. New York's by the influx of asylum seekers straining already full shelters. California, home to 44% of the nation's homeless, faces sprawling urban density issues, but its milder climate makes unsheltered living less lethal than Vermont's deadly winters. Where Vermont stands apart is in its sheltering capacity. In 2024, 95% of its homeless population was sheltered, far above the national average of 64%. Few states come close. Utah's Housing First model, which pairs permanent housing with addiction and mental health services, offers one promising example Vermont could scale. Minnesota's well-funded safety nets, particularly in rural areas, highlight how robust state support can reduce access gaps. And Vermont's opioid epidemic mirrors the devastation seen in West Virginia, where overdose deaths have soared in parallel. So why does a small, picturesque state face such outsized challenges? The answer lies in Vermont's unique mix: rural isolation that limits service access, a housing market squeezed by scarcity and tourism, and systemic cracks in healthcare and social safety nets. But statistics alone don't tell the story. To truly grasp this crisis, we must look at the people living it. Homelessness in Vermont isn't just measured in numbers, it's lived in stories. There's John, the former construction worker in Burlington, whose prescription painkillers spiraled into opioid addiction and a life in a tent. Or the single mother in Rutland, juggling 2 jobs yet still unable to cover rent. A transgender teen in Montpelier, cast out by family, finds refuge at Outright Vermont. And an Abenaki elder in Street Albans, priced out of housing, faces the compounded weight of poverty and discrimination. These stories cut through the stigma. They remind us that people don't choose homelessness. It's the product of addiction, discrimination, economic shocks, or simply bad luck in a system with too few safety nets. Vermont's winters make survival harsher. Its rural geography makes services harder to reach. And yet, within this struggle, resilience shines. Organizations like Spectrum Youth and Family Services or Good Samaritan Haven prove what compassion can achieve. They don't just hand out meals or beds. They restore dignity, offering counseling, community, and hope. In this travel documentary, we see Vermont's beauty not only in its mountains or maple groves, but in its people's capacity for compassion. The challenge is clear. Will we look away or will we choose to act? Because real change starts with empathy, and empathy, when paired with action, can rewrite the story of homelessness in Vermont. Vermont's homelessness crisis, with 3,458 people unhoused in 2024, a staggering 312% increase since 2020, is more than a statistic. It is a mirror held up to a community wrestling with addiction, soaring rents, racial disparities, and a frayed social safety net, all against the backdrop of brutal winters that make survival a daily battle. Behind every number is a story. John's struggle with opioids, the teen forced from home for their identity, the elder priced out of housing, the single parent working 2 jobs yet still falling short. These stories remind us that homelessness is not an abstract problem. It is human, immediate, and urgent. And yet, there is hope. Vermont's shelters, recovery programs, and legislative efforts, including those championed by Senator Bernie Sanders, prove that progress is possible when compassion meets policy. Organizations like Spectrum Youth and Family Services, Good Samaritan Haven, and the Vermont Coalition to End Homelessness are on the front lines, showing what resilience and community can achieve. But change cannot come from Vermont alone. It requires all of us. We invite you to act, learn more about, and support organizations making a difference. Donate to affordable housing, recovery programs, or services for marginalized groups. Share this story to raise awareness and spark conversation. Vermont's beauty has always drawn travelers, but true beauty lies not just in its landscapes, it lies in its capacity for compassion. Together, we can help ensure that no one is left behind in the cold. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue uncovering the untold stories behind every place we visit. Let's build a more compassionate future, where every community and every person has a place to call home.